Gojo vs Sukuna, the big money fight, the main event of the Jujutsu Kaisen series. And to be honest, currently, in all the big anime series, I don't think there is a fight the fans in the anime community want to see more other than Gojo vs Sukuna. So many theory videos have been made over the years on how a full-powered Sukuna would face off against Gojo at full power, and I myself can go into detail with that as well, with Sukuna using the 10 shadow techniques now against Gojo's 6 eyes and Limitless. But for me, what I have been loving about this topic is the build-up and anticipation for this fight. I can't remember a time when a fight between two characters was such a topic of conversation between fans. And the thing is, these two characters are not even the main characters of this series. Yuji is the main character for this series, and you can make the argument that Kenjaku is the main villain for this series so far, as he has orchestrated the Shibuya incident as well as the Culling games. Sukuna has been evil, don't get me wrong, and we have seen him cause mass murder, as we see at the beginning of chapter 120 when he revealed the massacre he has caused in Shibuya to Yuji. But he has never been the driving antagonist backing our main heroes into a corner. That role was always saved for Kenjaku. Kenjaku was the puppet master, whereas Sukuna was seen as the chaotic entity that can be a potential threat at the end game of the story. So this is why I say that we have never seen two non-main characters be the main event fight of a series before, and have had so much discussion throughout the community. Even growing up as a kid, even Goku vs Vegeta wasn't this much of a topic in the playground. I mean, granted, Goku had Super Saiyan 3, but when GT rolled over, and I know GT is non-canon, but we did end up seeing both Goku and Vegeta using Super Saiyan 4, and even then there was never a debate on who would win in a fight, despite both characters seeming equal in strength in that story. Build up for this fight feels like a big sporting event for me. Now, I'm a big sports fan. I watch football, soccer for my American friends, and I follow it with an absolute passion. I also follow UFC, boxing, WWE, and wrestling. Even though it's predetermined, I still count it as a sport, as well as NBA from time to time. Now, Gojo vs Sukuna feels like an end-of-season final or the main event of a pay-per-view fight. We even had Mei in chapter 222 saying she can make 5 billion with just streaming alone, with the Sukuna vs Gojo fight as a pay-per-view broadcast. The manga itself is treating it like a big sporting event. And with Akutami's knowledge of MMA when he referenced Yuji as Micro Crocop from episode 1 of the series, I think this was always Akutami's intention on how he wanted to build up Sukuna vs Gojo. Gojo vs Sukuna is basically the Jujutsu Kaisen version of the famous footballing rivalry of Messi vs Ronaldo. Two players for a period of 15 years were the best football players in the world, who were also playing for the best football teams in the world with Barcelona and Real Madrid. Now, just for context for non-football fans out there, whenever Barcelona and Real Madrid play each other, this match is dubbed and titled as the El Clasico. But it's always the build-up for El Clasico and the stories going into the match that made the rivalry so fierce and was such a conversation between fans. Who would score more goals, Messi or Ronaldo? How many red cards will there be? Who will win the midfield battle? What will the opposing coaches be saying about each other in the pre-match press conference? Especially during the Pep Guardiola and Jose Mourinho era. There's so much build-up and talking points before the ball is even kicked. That is what made the match during that time so special. And those minor details going into the match between Sukuna and Gojo is also such a talking point for this fight, such as the 10 shadows technique that Sukuna now has. How will he use these techniques against Gojo? As Gojo himself mentioned to Megumi in a flashback in chapter 117, that a 6 eyes user with the Limitless technique from the head of the Gojo clan, as well as the head of the Zenin family who possessed the 10 shadow technique, both ended up killing each other. This was massive foreshadowing. Us fans could never picture Megumi going up against Gojo unless one of them turned evil. Well, something even more incredible than that happened. Sukuna in chapter 212 ended up taking over Megumi's body. In chapter 213, we see Sukuna summon Nui, and I think this is the biggest we've ever seen Nui be. He's literally towering over the buildings like a kaiju, And from chapters 217 and 219, we see Sukuna fighting with Yoruzu, using the 10 shadow technique and even summoning Mahoraga to break her domain expansion and finish her off for good. We have seen now Sukuna not only use the 10 shadow technique very effectively, but also arguably use them better than Megumi himself. I mean, look at Nui. When has Megumi ever summoned Nui to be that massive? There's also the incomplete domain expansion of Chimera Shadow Garden. Megumi never completed it throughout the series, but Sukuna can definitely complete it. Within the Chimera Shadow Garden, the Shikigamis as well as the user can duplicate and can reach 120% of their potential. That is massive. Can you imagine Gojo fighting off against 3 Sukunas as well as all the Shikigamis? Hell, can you imagine Gojo fighting off against 3 Sukunas and 3 Mahoragas, all within Chimera Shadow Guard? What if Sukuna is able to even merge both Malevolent Shrine and Chimera Shadow Garden together, having the slicing effects of Malevolent Shrine as well as the darkness of Chimera Shadow Guard? You can even flip it to Gojo. Has he improved on his techniques? We have seen before that Gojo is always willing to improve on himself, as we saw in the Gojo Past arc in chapter 76, a whole year after the incident with the Star Plasma Vessel and Toji, as he learned how to master Limitless and reverse curse technique to preserve his cursed energy, making him more efficient. So what more can he do? Are we going to now see the power of the 6 eyes at full potential? We know he can use it to gauge cursed energy, as we saw in episode 20 of season 1, where he can see that Yuji's cursed energy has increased. But can the 6 eyes do more? And what other destructive techniques can Gojo use other than Hollow Purple? Can Gojo even kill Sukuna because he is inside Megumi's body? Will he sacrifice his friend to save the world, or will Sukuna try to take over Gojo's body in a massive plot twist? This is what I mean by mini storylines going into the fight. There's so much that can happen that builds up the hype for this fight even more. What Akutami has also done to build up the anticipation for this fight is keeping both characters separate from each other for the longest time. Now, I know they both interacted right at the beginning of the story, but that was to establish the big money fight between these 2 characters. I mean, look at the title of the first episode. It's literally called Ryomen Sukuna. And in the first 3 episodes, Akutami established that Sukuna was the king of all curses and was the strongest cursed in the strongest age of Jujutsu sorcerers. Whilst we have Gojo in episode 2 straight up say that he is the strongest, and the way he was playing around with Sukuna in episode 2 and the confidence he had in his abilities, it made you believe that Gojo might be right. He in fact might be the strongest, as he proclaims. Sukuna then says to Gojo that Gojo will be the first person he kills once he has full control of Yuji's body, with Gojo then replying that it's an honor to be targeted by the great Sukuna. This was all at the beginning of the story. The story itself established that Gojo is the strongest sorcerer currently, as well as established that full-powered 20-fingered Sukuna can also be the strongest, despite Gojo saying that he would win in that fight. So they had their back and forth at the beginning of the story, but they have never interacted with each other since, until chapter 221, when Gojo returned from the Prism Realm. We started to then see almost like a parallel journey through the story between the 2 characters in the way they showed off their powers, or how they interact with other characters, or even feats that these 2 characters do within the story. Look at season 1 for instance. We have episode 4 where Yuji forces Sukuna to fight off against the cursed room, and we see him absolutely dominate this curse, slicing its arm without even us the viewer noticing when he did that. We also saw Malevolent Shrine for the first time, and we see the way Sukuna is as a person through this brief interaction with the cursed room. First, he wanted to recruit the cursed room in order to kill Yuji's friends, but then the cursed room starts attacking him as Sukuna regenerates Yuji's arm, much to his dismay. As Sukuna's supreme confidence and charisma over this creature makes you almost want to root for him, because he just makes it look so cool. And the laugh as well, it's such a contagious laugh, almost Joker-like. If anything, Sukuna is the Joker of this series, a villain that you want to hate so much, but because he's so effortlessly cool and so charismatic, you can't help but like this character despite him being a villain. And Sukuna is still nowhere close to his full strength, and he's playing around with his cursed room, who, let me remind you, is a special grade curse. Sukuna is playing around with a special grade curse. He's having fun, and the manifestation of this cursed spirit emerged from the cursed wombs which spawned from eating one of Sukuna's fingers. So Sukuna's finger created this special grade curse. we see how the students were trying to fight off this cursed spirit, but they had no chance. Yuji was cowering when he was up against this cursed spirit, and even now, to this day, we have never seen Yuji so scared in this story apart from his interaction with this special grade curse. And then Sukuna comes in and makes it light work of it. This was so surreal because we have seen the damage normal cursed spirits can do, and then we meet this special grade curse who looks unbeatable, but then Sukuna just takes the piss and beats it easily, laughing at it while he does it. And this is supposed to be the weakest version of Sukuna? Are you taking the piss, Akutami? What is Sukuna's potential? Then 3 episodes later, we go to episode 7 of the first season and we see Gojo vs Jogo. Now, I've already made videos describing the significance of this episode, so do go check that video out. But this time, in episode 7, it was Gojo's turn to take the piss out of a special grade curse in Jogo. Now, obviously Jogo is a higher level of a special grade curse compared to the one Sukuna fought in episode 4. But again, whatever Sukuna can do, Gojo can do as well, outclassing Jogo in every way. And in similar fashion to Sukuna, completely disrespecting his enemy, calling him weak in the middle of the fight, whilst he picked up Yuji and is tutoring Yuji whilst he is fighting off against an unregistered special grade curse. And just like Sukuna in episode 4, we got to see Gojo's domain expansion, Infinity Void, which basically overloads the enemy with unlimited information. As Gojo says to Jogo in that moment, you have everything, but you can't do anything. Fast forward to the Shibuya incident arc, and we see chapter 89 how Gojo went out of his way to save all the normal civilians, aka the non-sorcerers, against Mahito, Chozo, Hanami, and Jogo, as well as Mahito's army of transfigured humans. Gojo used his domain expansion to save people, whereas Sukuna used his domain expansion and he ended up destroying Shibuya and massacring countless innocent people. Within the Shibuya arc itself, you saw Gojo being the hero and showcasing his strength against Kenjaku's special grade curses, but then he gets sealed away into the prison realm in chapter 91. And 11 chapters later, we saw in chapter 112 Sukuna's return after Jogo fed Yuji 10 of Sukuna's fingers. So Akutami had Gojo shine at the beginning of the arc, but then he sealed him away, and almost as soon as he gets sealed away, we see Sukuna with 15 fingers of power unleash absolute carnage. Even though this version of Sukuna is still not the strongest version, he is still much stronger than the version Gojo fought at the beginning of the story. So it still would have been an epic fight, but once again this comes down to feats. Gojo uses his domain expansion for 0.2 seconds and defeats 1,000 transfigured humans, saves all the non-sorcerers, and has the special grade curses on the run, while Sukuna massacres the residents of Shibuya, easily kills a special grade curse in Jogo, and defeats a Shikigami that has never been defeated before in Mahoraga. And speaking of special grade curses, I find it so interesting that Sukuna also schools Jogo between chapters 114 and 116 in the same fashion that Gojo did all the way back in episode 7. This was not by accident. Akutami wanted us to compare both fights to each other for us to understand that these two characters are not so different from each other. Sukuna tells Jogo to stand proud and that he is strong, whereas Gojo says to him that he is weak. Sukuna does it just before he kills Jogo, whereas Gojo does it just to take the piss. However, Gojo is a Jujutsu sorcerer and is a direct enemy of the cursed spirits, whereas Sukuna constantly belittles the humans, calling them weak and pathetic. Like, look at Yuji in chapter 215. Sukuna is laughing at Yuji and calling him pitiful and pathetic, just like how Gojo was laughing at Jogo back in episode 7, calling him weak. But the fact that Sukuna wanted Jogo to feel good about himself before his death tells me that, for his own kind at least, Sukuna is the leader and the mentor figure for them, as we see Jogo crying immediately after Sukuna compliments him, which shows that even these all-powerful special grade curses look up to Sukuna. He's not called the king of all curses for no reason. Just like how you see Gojo being the strongest amongst the sorcerers and the way he protects his students, both of these characters are the leaders of their kind. Sukuna is the king of all curses and Gojo is the sensei that happens to be known as the strongest sorcerer in the world. So they're both the leaders of the two biggest forces of the Jujutsu Kaisen world. Look at chapter 222. It was these two characters representing both the cursed spirits and the Jujutsu sorcerers in a big epic battle to determine who controls the world. The victor of this fight will tip the balance back into the winner's representing group, which again will add to the anticipation of the stakes for this fight. But going back to the point of not having these characters interact with each other ever since the start of the story, professional wrestling use this storyline tactic all the time. When there's two fan favorite big time wrestlers that the promotion knows will be a big money fight, the promotion itself will go out of its way to make sure that the two fan favorite wrestlers do not interact with one another unless it's in a big time pay-per-view. Now, I could use so many examples throughout the history of wrestling, but the moment I will use is the WWE Money in the Bank pay-per-view back in 2017. Now, the two wrestlers I want to use in this example are AJ Styles and Shinsuke Nakamura. Both of these two wrestlers were part of the Money in the Bank pay-per-view, which is basically a match that involves 6 wrestlers, and whoever gets the briefcase at the top wins the Money in the Bank contract, which allows them to challenge for the WWE title or the WWE Universal title. AJ and Nakamura were participating in this match in June 18th, 2017. However, both of these wrestlers came to the WWE the year prior, back in 2016, AJ making his debut in the 2016 Royal Rumble and Nakamura making his in-ring WWE debut at NXT TakeOver Dallas at WrestleMania weekend. It's been a whole year since these guys were in the same company, but they never crossed paths. However, before they both came to the WWE, AJ and Nakamura had a match for the IWGP Intercontinental Championship at Wrestle Kingdom 10 in January 2016, just before both wrestlers made their move to the WWE. And that match was an absolute classic, one of the matches of the year, and ever since then we have not seen them both go 1v1, even though both of these wrestlers were in the same company for a whole year. Now, doesn't this sound familiar, guys? We had two arguably the best in-ring wrestlers in the world in the same company for a whole year, but they never crossed paths until the Money in the Bank pay-per-view in 2017. When Nakamura was about to climb the ladder and get the Money in the Bank briefcase, who stops him? None other than AJ Styles himself. The fans go wild with yes chants all over the stadium. This is what the fans have been waiting for. Two of the best wrestlers in the world going at it, which eventually led to Nakamura winning the Royal Rumble in 2018 and facing AJ Styles at WrestleMania. These two only had one match before at Wrestle Kingdom, and that was enough to salivate the fans for more. Exactly the same way as we saw Gojo vs Sukuna in episode 2. Both of these characters were not fighting anywhere near their true potential, and yet it left us fans wanting for more. So much so that we have all dedicated videos for this eventual rematch. This is the genius of having both of these two characters separate for so long. We were able to see Sukuna grow and slowly reach into his true power, whilst we saw glimpses of absolute madness when it comes to Gojo dominating his opponents. It felt like a slow burn for an even greater fight, because every time Gojo would do something, we would ask ourselves, what if he tried that against full-powered Sukuna? Or whenever Sukuna would do something crazy, like beating Mahoraga, we would ask ourselves, Sukuna beating Mahoraga is great, but how would he face off against a serious Gojo? Episode 2 fight has around 13 million views on YouTube. Even though both characters were not at their peak, buildings were still crashing. The choreography and camera angles still left you at the edge of your seat, which feeds into the imagination. If they were able to do this much damage in this 1-minute clip, can you imagine the chaos that would occur if they had a full-fledged fight at the peak of their powers? That's what makes this fight such a mouth-watering prospect. But again, there's always this constant comparison between these two characters, which adds to the anticipation of this dream fight. Now, with both of these characters, I think we can all agree that when these two characters are at their absolute peak in strength, they both are the strongest characters in the verse. But what does being the strongest mean to these two characters? Gojo says in chapter 78 that being the strongest isn't enough, and that he can only save those who want to be saved. He mentions when Yuji is knocked out earlier on in season 1 that he needs allies strong enough to change the world of Jujutsu. Following on from this, we see in chapter 219 in a flashback where Yorozu is constantly saying that she won't let Sukuna be alone, and in the very next chapter, we see in a flashback that Gojo says to Shoko that again he repeats his words that he mentioned before and says that he will foster a group but he further added that he won't let anyone be alone. There is a clear theme here with being the strongest, which if you are the strongest, you will lead a life of solitude and loneliness. But what I find here in these brief flashbacks from both chapters is that Sukuna is sitting down with all his power and is choosing to stand alone at the top of the mountain, whereas Gojo is going out of his way to make a group, almost in a way to share that strength. Like for him, it's not about him being the strongest, it's about making an entire generation of strong sorcerers that can challenge the status quo. Earlier in the video, I talked about how similar these two characters are, and in the Gojo flashback arc, you can see that Gojo was on a dark path, as he believed protecting the weak is a chore and hates being righteous, as he mentioned in his conversation with Geto in chapter 65. This is very similar to how Sukuna is when he talks about humans being weak, but then now when you see him talk the way he talks, how he doesn't want anyone to be alone again, it hits a lot more differently now, because his best friend Geto was alone. He didn't have anyone to talk to when it comes to his struggles, which led to him down a path of destruction. Gojo being the strongest feels it's his responsibility to make sure that everyone is okay. Look at chapter 70. Despite Geto being there, Gojo is the one up all night using his Limitless to make sure no one attacks Riko. Gojo is the one making the calls to make sure Riko is enjoying her best life before the merger with Master Tengen, as mentioned by Geto again in chapter 70. He's not only making sure that Riko is protected by him, but he's also making sure that Riko's mental well-being is at ease. Hence why he's taking her out to canoeing, having picnics, going to the aquarium, and all other fun activities. This was all his suggestion, and he knows Riko is probably worried about the assassins and the fact that she has limited time left as well, so he's going out of his way to ensure that not only Riko is protected, but she's having the most fun in these brief moments she has left. While Sukuna is not even about that. When you see him in Malevolent Shrine, he's sitting at his throne high up by himself. Sukuna is the king that thrives in loneliness and solitude, whereas Gojo at this point in his life thrives with others. Despite these two characters being very similar to each other in the way they play around with their opponents with supreme confidence whilst they're fighting, and the fact that they're both leaders in their respective groups, their ideals in being the strongest is very different. One wants it for himself, the other wants it for everyone else. I do love the way Akutami did this, because essentially these two characters are the examples of being successful and being the best. So how would you, the reader, achieve that in life? How would you become successful? Would you take the Sukuna route and dedicate all your time to yourself and no one else in order to be successful? Or would you be like Gojo and aim to not only be successful, but take others up with you and be successful with your friends? I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but that's my take on how he used these two characters as the strongest in the series and showed them as examples on how to be successful to the younger audience who read and watch this series. And I believe whoever wins this fight will redefine what it means to be the strongest and how to achieve that pinnacle of strength for the story. Now, me personally, I want to see an absolute classic between these two characters. We have seen some epic fights in this series, and if Akutami lives up to the hype, Gojo vs Sukuna can potentially be the best fight in not only in Jujutsu Kaisen, but also in anime history. Between these two characters, as much as I love Gojo as a character, I do believe him losing this fight will be best for business, because it just enhances the stakes even more. If Gojo, the strongest in the world, can't defeat Sukuna, then who can? Gojo losing this fight will bring about the fear factor again and make us feel that dread whenever one of our heroes is face to face with Sukuna. Plus, it makes the story more interesting. If we did end up seeing Gojo lose to Sukuna, if Gojo wins, then it's only a matter of time before Gojo beats Kenjaku. Now, Kenjaku can pull out all the tricks he wants, but at the end of the day, he will still end up losing to Gojo. So if Sukuna doesn't beat him now, then Gojo will ultimately end the series by defeating all the remaining antagonists. But let's just hope that this fight lives up to the hype, which I'm sure it will. Thank you for watching this video. Please leave a like and thumbs up. Trust me guys, you guys doing that will help the channel out massively. And as a request from your tribal chief, we are on our journey to 10,000 subscribers, so don't forget to subscribe to the Shaman Tribe.